Hello and welcome to Civil Society Speaks, the podcast by social platform dedicated to amplifying the voices of civil society organizations from all over Europe. My name is Andrea Abril, and for this episode, we have the pleasure of featuring two key organizations in the fight for LGBTI rights in Europe. First, we have Chaber, the executive director of ILGA-Europe, the NGO that unites over 700 LGBTI member organizations across Europe and Central Asia, working for the freedom, equality, and safety of LGBTI people. And we have the luck to have one of its members, ACEPT Association, the first and largest human rights NGO in Romania defending the rights of LGBTQIA+ people. And representing it, we have Florina, its executive director. Welcome both.
Hi, thank you, Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea.
Let's dive right in. Could you give us an overview of what are the main challenges facing LGBTI people across Europe and how have things evolved in recent years?
Sure, very happy to. So, as you can imagine, the challenges across the region are very diverse because the legal and social situations are just very, very different. But there are a number of worrying trends we have been observing in the last couple of years. And maybe I'll start from saying it is really a critical moment in time or a critical year. European elections just happened, but there are also elections in around 30 countries in our region this year alone. So at the end of this year, we just might wake up in a very different Europe than the one we hoped for. And in this context of huge political shifts, we have also seen really an unprecedented rise in hate and violence against LGBTI people. It's been documented in ILGA-Europe's annual review for the last couple of years, but it's also clearly quite visible, for example, in the Fundamental Rights Agency's third LGBTI survey, which finds that nearly 2/3 of respondents across the EU frequently encountered hate statements and an increase in violence in their everyday lives. So we also see a growing number of politicians, but also representatives of governments, trying to use LGBTI people as scapegoats to really pull human rights in the middle of what they call a cultural war and trying to capitalize on this polarization of societies. And this level of political hate speech, this level of instrumentalization really has an effect on real people, on everyday people who lead their lives across Europe, because this hate speech does incite violence, it incites attacks on people, on organizations, and on prides. And not to mention, it does give fuel to regressive legislative proposals that have been popping up across the region. I think maybe worth to mention also for the context of challenges, I think everyone knows by now that there is a growing popularity of the far right in many places across Europe. And with that, we really should be concerned for the safety of people. And even in these countries that have had so far a better track record on equality. We see too many countries in Europe stalling in moving forward on legal protections or not renewing their commitments, for example, through national strategies or action plans. And this lack of action from European governments is also dangerous because without proper legislation in place, it's just way too easy for newly elected governments to quickly undermine human rights and democracy. And we've seen that in Italy a couple of years ago, where within the span of a single election, a newly elected government could backtrack on the safety and security of queer families and queer people. So that's an overview, let's say, very short here on the challenges across the region. And I just want to say there are also positive developments. So we do see a number of governments taking seriously this rise in hate speech and this rise in violence and playing their role. And by playing their role, I mean really legislating protections. So hate crimes and hate speech can be named as protections or provisions that have advanced across Europe in the last years. But also protection from conversion therapies is another issue that has been picked up by many countries, by many governments. And I guess we'll talk about our rainbow map a little bit later. But just one thing that is clearly visible is that when there is political will and commitment from the side of governments, this translates into action, it is possible to oppose this wave of far right and this wave of anti-rights notions and actually, build the progress we're all working for.
Now, Florina, shifting our focus to Romania, what is the current situation in the country for LGBTI people and civil society organizations fighting for their rights?
It is very difficult to sum up in brief the situation of LGBTI rights in Romania at the moment. We can refer to the rainbow map. Romania ranks 39 on the rainbow map this year out of 49 countries, if I'm not mistaken, which is very low. Actually, very little has happened in Romania since homosexuality was decriminalized in 2001. And that was the objective Accept Association had when it started its activity in 1996. So to put it in context. At the same time, anti-discrimination legislation was enacted in 2001, which covers currently sexual orientation. Otherwise, in the last 20 years, not much has been achieved in terms of securing legally rights for LGBTQ people in Romania. This is why we have been advocating for legal recognition and protection of same-sex families, for legal gender recognition procedure for transgender people, and a clear legislation around hate crime and hate speech. Accept has been doing that, also using strategic litigation. So at the moment, there are a number of cases against Romania in European courts. I'm thinking European Court of Human Rights and the Court of Justice of the European Union around these topics: hate crime, legal gender recognition for transgender persons, and same-sex families recognition, because they are missing. And Romania has been convicted for these violations of human rights in these European courts, in these cases that Accept supported and that Accept is now currently monitoring the implementation and working on their implementation. So at the moment, let's say that after the decriminalization of homosexuality in 2001 and adoption of anti-discrimination legislation that covers only sexual orientation, also adopted in 2001, not much has happened in Romania in terms of LGBTQ plus people's rights. This is why we rank so low in the Rainbow Equality Index, in the Rainbow Map. We are fighting together with other LGBTQ plus NGOs and other allied civil society organizations to make Romania a better place for LGBTQ people. Behind every case we won in court, there are real people, especially if we think about the Buhuceanu, Ciobotaru, and 20 other families in front of the European Court of Human Rights. There are real people, real families who suffer because of the lack of legal protection and recognition of their families and of their rights. That is the situation at the moment. These are the main advocacy directions we are fighting for at the moment. Of course, there are many other things we could talk about. There's no ban on conversion therapies in Romania. There's no access to medical care, or very limited access to medical care for transgender people. There are many instances of discrimination and harassment of LGBTQ plus students and pupils in the Romanian education system. And every year we have to fight a new initiative that aims to restrict visibility or rights for LGBTQ people in Romania. Only this year, there was a new referendum proposed to actually ban in the constitution access to marriage for LGBTQ people who actually lack any form of legal recognition and protection for their families at the moment in Romania.
Thank you very much, Florina. From a third association, what initiatives are you currently implementing to improve the situation of LGBTI people in the country?
As I mentioned earlier, we use a combination of instruments and strategies in order to secure rights for LGBTQ people in Romania. We have been doing a strategic litigation and legal advocacy. It is very important because with the rise of the far-right movement through strategic litigation, you not only change the lives of real people, but you can secure minimum standards for respect of rights for LGBTQ people and for anyone else for that matter. I think the way a country or a society looks at LGBTQ rights is a very good indicator of democracy in that country. And for Romania and for many other countries in Eastern Europe, this would actually signal a very deep change in society, a very deep change in the way these countries understand democracy and rights of any minority. It would be a sign of how these countries, Romania included, understands rule of law besides respect of human rights and rights of any minority that has been vulnerable to discrimination historically. So we do strategic litigation and legal advocacy. The majority of cases that in which Romania has been convicted in European courts regarding sexual orientation or gender identity have been supported by Accept, and we are currently working on their implementation. So we are monitoring their implementation at national level. I'm thinking when it comes to hate crime, MCNAC against Romania, a judgment with the European Court of Human Rights on hate crime. I'm thinking X and Y versus Romania regarding the lack of legal gender recognition procedure for transgender persons, or Buhuceanu, Ciobotaru, and 20 other families against Romania, a judgment from the European Court of Human Rights regarding the lack of any form of legal recognition and protection of same-sex families in Romania. All these cases were possible because we have a program of services offered to the community. All these cases stem from work that has been done directly with people affected by the lack of legal protections and affected by discrimination. And sometimes discrimination is practiced by your own government, as is the case of same-sex families in Romania. They are discriminated by law by the Romanian state. So we offer legal counseling, psychological counseling, guidance in transition for transgender persons, because all these services are lacking. The Romanian government does not offer anything regarding these very concrete needs of LGBTQ people in Romania. So we do strategic litigation, we do advocacy work, and we offer a lot of services directly to the community who needs them because they cannot access them anywhere else. And I would mention also a lot of community work, whether it's through events, cultural events, or more specific training for activists, working with our volunteers. We need to empower the community to face discrimination, face hate speech and hate crime, and know their rights. And all this work and these strategic directions are linked together because this is how we will actually bring about change in Romania for LGBTQ people. You can have an amazing advocacy campaign, but at the end of the day, you need your community to feel respected and empowered by the changes you bring.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Florina. We've been talking about the Rainbow Map, and in this tool, we can find huge disparities between EU countries in terms of protection of LGBTI rights and equality. What steps can be taken to support communities in these lower scoring countries? And how can the European Union address these huge gaps?
I'll start from saying that I couldn't agree more with what Florina said. We, as a movement, we need diverse strategies. We need organizations able to fulfill multiple roles in relation to work with governments, with communities, with other stakeholders for meaningful change to actually happen. So that is the basis of it. We need a strong civil society able to play diverse roles for communities and for rights to be advanced. But more specifically around the Rainbow Map, well, it measures the legal situation in the 49 countries based on over 70 individual legislative and policy criteria. And the way that ILGA-Europe come up with this Rainbow Map is that we work with our members like Chaber, Romania, to see what is the actual legal situation and legal progress year by year. And from that, we also learn how these rights are advanced. This doesn't give us a sense really on what it is like to live in these countries socially, because legal situation does not equal the social situation or perception of society, let's say. But as organizations, we advocate for laws and policies because legal protections just make it so much harder for governments and other actors to target communities or to backslide on human rights and to propose these horrible changes or proposals like Florina was mentioning. Also, as she said, LGBTI rights are really a good litmus test for how democracy is doing. So the first step really to support communities is indeed to fill these legislative gaps to prevent LGBTI people from enjoying their rights. If we look at our Rainbow Map, the score for each country is supplemented with specific country recommendations for legislative change. Different for every country, depending on what the movement sees as the top of the agenda in said country. So I won't go into the details of kind of explaining who needs to do what, but just to say for many of the lower scoring EU countries, this lower score relates to a lack of recognition of rights and protections that already exist really in the majority of others. So yes, we are talking about non-discrimination provisions, and EU guarantees employment in terms of sexual orientation, but the rest can be in many countries just a huge gap. Recognition of same-sex unions, civil partnerships, marriage equality, again, protection from hate crimes, which I've already been talking about. And really the most glaring gaps in terms of protections across the region are around intersex people or intersex rights. There is still very, very few member states that actually have in place a prohibition of medical interventions on intersex people without informed consent. And we still have issues with asylum policies, with legal gender recognition. And then again, the more worrying developments like foreign agents laws in some countries, not in the EU, but still, that are attempting to limit the operations of civil society, or the bans on legal gender recognition, the bans on trans healthcare. ILGA-Europe also covers Russia. So an example given there can be the criminalization of really an entire segment of the population, like Russia did with its ruling last year, deeming the LGBT movement an extremist organization. So this really paints a vivid picture. And what can the EU do? First, fill in the gaps in European legislation that are well within the mandate of the EU to fill. So we're talking here, especially in light of the increased hate crime and violence, we're talking here about engagement of the EU with member states to work towards an extension of Euro crimes. Similarly, more work needs to be done on the exchange of good practices around gender-based violence and domestic violence policies for them to truly include LGBTI people. Again, then the horizontal anti-discrimination directive, about which we have been talking for 15 years, which is still not moving forward in spite of clear commitments from many, many member states to take this up. Secondly, in the last mandate, we saw for the first time that both the Commission and member states have strongly applied existing tools to counter violations, like in the case of infringement against Hungary or the freezing of funds for Poland for their violations. And this is something that needs to be continued. And the implementation of court judgments and the pressure from member states for other member states to implement court judgments really needs to be stepped up. Let's not forget the EU's role in its foreign relations in relation to accession countries, even though we focus on EU member states. But also maybe circling back to the role of civil society I was talking about in the beginning. One huge role of the EU is to recognize that for civil society, also on national level, to function properly and to be able to work with governments, work with communities, funding is crucial. And organizations on national level, like ACEP, but many, many others, find it very difficult to, in this political context, to actually find sustainable sources of funding to fund their activities that are playing a crucial role in the empowerment of communities and in the building of laws. So that role of the EU as a funding mechanism for equality, for human rights, also cannot be really underappreciated.
Amazing, thank you. And now looking ahead, what will be your main ask for these new mandates?
Well, the first and foremost ask from ILGA-Europe, but also from LGBTI groups and organizations across the region is for a strong mandate of a commissioner for equality and fundamental rights, and for a renewed LGBTIQ strategy for the European Union. So the future Union of Equality, again, needs to look at closing the existing gaps in protections. Things that come to mind is, for example, the parenthood recognition is an important piece of standard setting on EU level, and it's something that member states need to move forward in this new mandate. Freedom of movement, as Florina has been saying, is still not guaranteed for many people, for many families, but also for trans, intersex, and non-binary people across the EU. And the Commission also needs to close the legislative gap with a proposal in the next 5 years. Then, if we look at treaties, one of our asks is that any future EU treaty revision should add the grounds of gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics to Article 19. And regarding intersex rights specifically, we are still waiting for the publication of the first EC study on the lived reality of intersex people. Overall, we've been really, really glad to see that increasingly LGBTI people are seen not only through the prism of sexual orientation, gender identity, sex characteristics, but also that policies account for the fact that LGBTI people have more often limited access to education, to employment, to the employment market, to housing, and other socioeconomic issues. So we really believe the new strategy should commit to further action on this, to collecting data, to including or through the inclusion of questions on SOGS in the Eurostat and Eurobarometer, that LGBTI people should be included as target groups in the next European Social Fund Plus and in EU policies on housing and homelessness. And these next few months will be really very important for setting the stage for the next 5 years. So we're really looking forward to working with the new parliament and the new commission, but also with our members to bolster the engagement of member states on all of these asks and on EU policy broadly.
We're also looking forward to working again with ILGA-Europe and the new European Parliament and the European Commission in order to see that LGBTQ rights are actually taking seriously into account in every policy that is adopted at EU level. And of course, there are very specific needs that we have, as Chaber has already mentioned, for a new strategy for equality and for very specific measures, especially when it comes to parental rights. But I would add that we will probably work again together on strategic litigation cases at EU level and also on the judgments implementation. We have, for example, Coman at the moment, Coman and others, an ECJ judgment that has not been implemented by Romania. And we would like to see the European Commission taking a stance on this. We would like to see all European actors who have a role in ensuring equality for everyone taking a stance on this lack of implementation of ECJ judgments, because there are real people affected by the fact that they are not recognized as family in Romania. And there is also another recent case that we brought in front of the European Court of Justice. It is about freedom of movement, of course, involving transgender persons, because even if they follow a legal gender recognition procedure in one member state, that procedure is not automatically recognized in another member state. And this is where we are actually working together with ILGA-Europe and other members of ILGA-Europe in order to bring change. I think we live a very challenging time in our history, and we have to rise up to the challenge. I think the very idea of the European Union has to be defended for all the rights that we have achieved under this political construction. The fact that we can move freely, the fact that human rights are becoming a standard of what the EU means is worth fighting for. Besides the fact that we have to protect real people and real lives. The union of equality has to translate into a real lived union of equality if we want people to defend Europe and to defend the idea of a united Europe. And this is where the responsibility of the European Commission and the European Parliament also come in. They have to transform this idea into a reality so that people feel the benefit of having this European Union in place. And for LGBTQ people, this union of equality still needs to be enacted, still needs to become a reality. And this is where we need to work together. We need to secure funding, as Chaber said, and we need to work together with other actors of civil society, because LGBTQ people and their lack of rights recognition should not only be the problem or the concern of LGBTQ rights organizations. This situation should be of concern to any human rights organization, because nobody should be left alone, because LGBTQ people are members of European societies, and they are just as worthy of defending their rights as anyone else.
We know that the fight is far from over, and with the opposition we're faced, we're quite often finding ourselves punching a little bit above our weight. But with that, while the situation is complex and is grim, I think we're just also grateful for the alliances we're building and the coalitions we're building. So also a huge thank you to you, Andra, and the social platform for working with us for a better and for more equal societies.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Andrea. Thank you, Chaber. Shall we mention the conference in Bucharest?
Yes, actually. Well, do you want to do the honors as hosts?
Yeah. We are very happy to be partners of ILGA-Europe in organizing the ILGA-Europe annual conference in Bucharest this year in October. This is a historical moment for us. The last ILGA-Europe conference took place in Bucharest in 2000. So here we are together again, in a different context, of course, looking back at our achievements and summoning our courage to look forward, especially with the challenges that we face today.
Yeah, brilliantly said. And our entire team and also many from our membership are really truly excited to be coming to Bucharest this year. In a year when we do need courageous conversations and we need to seek new strategies, it feels very appropriate to come back to a place where, ILGA-Europe, ACEPT, and many others came together 24 years ago and started building together a something that turned into a very strong European network. So it's a good moment of return and a good point to look back and look forward.
Thank you both. It was a pleasure to listen to you. And thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights on the challenge facing LGBTI people in Europe and the crucial role of civil society organizations addressing these issues. This has been Civil Society Speaks, the podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of civil society organizations from all over Europe. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode.